Hello and welcome to First Flight, a Star Trek Enterprise rewatch podcast where we are watching and discussing each episode of Enterprise in succession. First Flight is a proud member of the Tricorder Transmissions Network.
This is Commander Tucker of Enterprise. We've got some information you're going to want to hear.
Welcome, Enterprise fans. I am your co-host, Melanie.
And I'm your co-host, Abby.
And tonight we are discussing Detained, the 20th episode of Season 1. This episode was written by Mike Sussman and Phyllis Strong, based on a story by Rick Berman and Brannon Braga. It was directed by David Livingston. Woohoo! And it aired on April 24th, 2002. But before we begin our chat, you know what? We need to issue a read alert.
Tactical alert. All hands to stations.
Spoiler warning ahead. We might end up talking about any part of the series at any time. And now for a recap of Detained, I give you Abby's Captain's Log. Okay, Abby, let's go.
Captain Star Log Supplemental.
All right, here's my summary of Detained. Archer and Mayweather are detained by the Tandarans in a Suliban internment camp. Archer enlists the aid of Enterprise to look past their own prejudices and free the wrongfully imprisoned Suliban.
Okay, it's time to deploy our Subspace Amplifiers and get into this episode. Abby, I'm so curious about your thoughts on Detained.
All right, well, much to the surprise of our listeners, we're not going to spend much time on the cold open because it's about, 30 seconds long and not much happens there. So I'm going to wrap in the cold open with the first scene. And I have to say that I like that this opened on Travis, not Archer. I think that that's nice to see Travis getting to shine overall in this episode. He has a few really outstanding moments, and I like that when he first woke up, he checked on the captain, of course, first thing. So glad he checked for a pulse. I was worried about that. And then he goes out to do as much reconnaissance as he can while still being able to see the doorway of that house, which I really appreciated. Like, he's looking back and forth. He didn't even close the door all the way. He's still watching Archer as he's going out to try to see what's going on and what's up with the Suliban. So bravo, Travis. That is the best way to get yourself up from ensign pretty quickly.
I agree with you, Abby. I really enjoyed that part too. I'm so glad that Travis had more to do in this episode. And I'm sure that Anthony Montgomery was happy about that. I thought when they showed him waking up at the very beginning there, he did a really good job conveying how crappy they were feeling.
Yeah.
And might I say, when Archer hoists him up to that window, Anthony Montgomery is very fit and very strong because he made that look so easy. It was just boom, up he goes. It was like, boom, 2 seconds, no sweat, totally easy. I really liked this whole beginning too. And when you're watching Enterprise for the first time and knowing about the Suliban, you're like, what is going on here? So I really liked how that all unwove as well.
Yeah, and I have to say, I think it was interesting to see the differences between the Tandarans and the Suliban, even just in the way that they were presented when you see them. Now, obviously, I know that Suliban makeup is a humongous pain. Like, you hear people talking about how it took them 5 or 6 hours to get into that makeup. So you knew the Tandarans were probably going to have some much simpler makeup, which they did, just the little nose loop. But just the fact that one looked more like a human and one didn't served that contrast. And also the clothing choices here. You know, I like to look at the costumes. And I have to say that one of those Suliban in that camp must have been a tailor, because I've never seen prison clothes so beautifully constructed. I mean, multiple pieces, all of them fit really close and snug to the body. They had those little corset things and belts. So bravo to whoever is spending their time in internment doing their tailoring skills. I should go hook up with Garrick on DS9, in a couple years and open a really great clothing store. But I think it was interesting too that the prisoners were the ones in color, because a lot of times when you see prison jumpsuits, especially in sci-fi, they're grays and browns and neutrals, and these were people who were being detained, but they still almost showed their spirit in the clothing and the colors they were wearing. And the Tandarans were all in the darks and the neutrals and the metallics. So that was interesting right away from the setup, that it was kind of flipping your expectations of what you would see.
Oh, wow. I've never thought of that. That's a really good point. I thought that the makeup design was fantastic in this one. And I really, really liked the set a lot, in that just those few rooms and the hallways. It really did project the gritty feeling of that detention camp. And I have to say, Abby, I've always really liked this episode. For me, it does stand out in season 1. It's one I've always really enjoyed, because it's an important message to tell. And that's what Star Trek does so well. So I really appreciated this one.
Yeah, and I appreciated that we saw Archer having the same reaction that all of us seeing Suliban together would have, that he assumed that they're all cabal. He assumed that the child is there to get genetic enhancements. And that is very human, and that is very appropriate for the interactions that he has had with Suliban in the past. So, but then it's also interesting to see how quickly he realizes that he might be wrong, and that he seeks out and assimilates new information to change his thinking, because he knows he doesn't have the full picture. And that is one of the reasons that I like Archer as a character. He is not afraid to change his mind, and he is not afraid to say that he was wrong, and he's not afraid to act on those changed feelings when he realizes that he should. It is a very Jonathan Archer move, and this is a very Jonathan Archer moment in this season.
I 100% agree with you. When he sits down at the table and offers his handshake to Danik, that really got to me. And I think Scott Bakula did a great job conveying those emotions in his face. You could feel exactly what he was thinking at every moment. And I loved that as well.
So let's talk about when they sit down and have that chat, because I have to say that even in an episode that takes place in an internment camp, we talked a lot about and saw a lot of food. Now, not all of it was good food. I mean, that gruel was disgusting, and I absolutely love, jumping ahead a tiny bit here, how Travis just decimates it later to stall for time during the escape, and he's just talking about how awful that food is. It just makes me laugh every time. But the meal that the family shared with them, that looked delicious. Like, I'm not sure what they could do to the stuff that makes the gruel, or if they had, plants in the backyard or something. But again, bravo to Enterprise for making me notice the food in a scene that is only peripherally about the food. So that was kind of a thing that made me smile in this episode.
Yeah, I hear you. And I actually really liked that scene for a variety of different reasons. There was a lot of great exposition going on there and bonding between them. And I really appreciated how Travis told the Suliban daughter that the food was yummy. He was being so sweet to her. And I have to tell you, that Suliban girl, I don't think we got her name, really haunted me. And I also liked the makeup on her as well. And she was very good.
I agree. And you know what? Sometimes you feel in episodes that have child actors, especially ones that are in a lot of prosthetic, that it can be challenging to connect with them. But that was not the issue here. She was fantastic, even through all the makeup.
Yeah. And speaking of food, Abby, we have to point out the valve sealant comment that Travis made about the gruel, pointing back to, of course, I thought of Shuttlebot 1 with the mashed potatoes.
Oh, absolutely.
That was a good line there.
Travis really had some zingers in this, and I appreciate it. Zingers both in humorous ways and in really cut you to the quick, get to the heart of the matter moments. So bravo, Travis.
Oh, yes.
Speaking of some zingers, we should talk about Trip and T'Pol on the bridge with that first call with the Tandarans.
Yeah, that was a really interesting scene because Trip is clearly not happy with T'Pol. He's rolling his eyes. He's joking around about the electric chair. And there's some pretty thick tension going on here. I think that they each had valid points. I mean, T'Pol is talking about respecting a culture's laws, and she's the one to bring that up to everyone because that's something she would think of that as her role. And she's right about that. I think Trip also has reason to be suspicious. I thought, Abby, that conversation probably should have happened a little more privately in the ready room rather than kind of bickering on the bridge. It was, you know what I'm saying? But I know in the heat of the moment, you can't always do that. That's just a little thought I had.
Yeah, I thought that was a really interesting dynamic because part of why I enjoy this scene is because you can see that Trip and T'Pol are now at the point where they're comfortable with each other enough to do that, which is a huge step forward from where we were just a few episodes ago. I mean, think back to Pajem and in the Andorian incident. I mean, there was definitely a whole different tone of how it went back and forth with them. So at least we see some growth there. But what I was thinking to myself is, you know what? They're both completely right and they're both completely wrong. And somewhere in the middle, they need to find something. And yet I didn't really care for it on the bridge. And I didn't really care for Trip interrupting T'Pol when she was talking. But I don't know if they had an understanding because this is not the first time he's done that either. And it's not the first time that it happens when Archer's on the bridge. Like sometimes Trip or Phlox or somebody else with pertinent information jumps in. And we see that in other shows too. It felt more like a ping pong ball passing back and forth between them. And that made it feel almost more adversarial. But again, this is one of those times that Enterprise is living in the gray. Like T'Pol is completely right. So is Trip. Now, how are we going to do both these things the right way when they seem to be on opposite ends of a spectrum? So it was interesting to see that happen. And you know what? Maybe they should have just gone to that cool little conference table in the back, right?
Right.
This scene up here, while somehow it feels a little bit grating, by the second time you see T'Pol talking to the Tandarans on the bridge and they're doing the whole rescue plan, they're flowing like the well-oiled machine that we know they are. So I think the fact that this is in here is a great juxtaposition with what we see later on. And that just shows you how our crew comes together when it matters. And it means more because we saw the beginning of it. It wasn't just, well, of course we're going to jump in and have a great plan and all be on the same page. No, they weren't, but they were eventually.
That's true. It is interesting to see the different components of it. In some ways, to me, it almost mirrors what's happening on the planet between Archer and Grat, having different conversations with more information each time, that change in tone each time. And Trip and T'Pol are coming together and learning more information, and Grat and Archer are going further apart. And so maybe should we talk a little bit about this first meeting with Archer and Grat?
For sure. Well, it's interesting because you don't expect that early in an episode for things to seem to be resolving like that. So you kind of are already suspicious that this isn't probably how it's going to go, because we would not be spending a whole episode on this if it was just like, oh, oops, sorry, you strayed into our war zone. We're going to get you home. No problem. That's not an episode. You know, there's something else coming. So I feel like the audience is seeing this even in a different way than the two men are. And it's very obvious that they are feeling each other out. And they are starting off with the best of intentions and the best of hopes and no assumptions of anything other than honesty. However, I also think it's interesting in all the conversations and interactions that Archer and Grat have. Archer is really, really smart about how he uses his silences. And you see that more and more as it goes on. Like in this first one, he always has a good response. He's always willing to give something. He's very polite. But there's these little pauses here and there that you can see. Well, by the second time, then he's pausing a little more and hesitating a little more. By the third one, he's not saying much. And then at the end, at their very final moment, he doesn't even have to say a word. It's all done with just a look. So I think that progression of increasing silence between them is really powerful and really well done. And I would like to know how much of that was written into the script and how much of that was Scott Bakula's choice as Archer, because it felt really natural when I was watching it, that's how Archer would react. And I just bravo to whoever did that as a purposeful choice, because it was a really good one.
Wow, I'm glad you brought that up. I really appreciated the silences as well. And Archer has to get a lot of credit here. He is a smart, wonderful captain. And he played this really well with Grat, the way he withheld the information. He doesn't want to be strong-armed, like he said.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that right at the beginning when Grat said, please sit down. And both Archer and Travis just stood there like, They didn't even have to confer about that. They just were like, nope, not happening. I really liked that. So I think there were a lot of nuances between Archer and Grat, and using those silences, as you said, in such a smart way. Abby, I really liked that we got some more backstory on the Suliban, like learning about that their homeworld was made uninhabitable 300 years ago, that they've been nomadic, that they've settled on certain worlds. I found that really interesting. And it was nice to get a little bit more backstory, because there are different Suliban in different situations. They're not all in the Cabal, obviously, and assumptions were being made. And I really enjoyed the interactions with Danik and his daughter and Sajin and all of them. And I found the whole situation with the way the camp was portrayed, this yucky Major Krev, all of that was done really well. And I found it intriguing to learn a little bit more about the Suliban's backstory and how they're being treated now.
Yeah, and I think knowing that in the real world, this episode came on just months after 9/11 here in the United States, and all the things that happened with that, it does make me wonder, like, this was obviously a message that is needed then, now, and always. And it was very obviously put out there, because I think they didn't want any misinterpretation of what the message could be. But it is so interesting to see how they picked the Suliban for that. And I wonder to myself, was this always in the plan for the series? Was it always in the plan for the season? Was this something that got changed or tweaked after this all went down? Because it was the beginning of filming season 1 when everything happened. So they had plenty of time for this much later in the season episode to get some tweaks. And we know that sometimes, people were getting tweaks up to the night before of shooting. So I wonder if the story had been developed in a different way and it got changed. But I love what they did to the Suliban. I love that they're more nuanced. I love that they're not just, an alien bad guy. And I think that Trek is really good about doing that with a lot of their quote unquote villain species. I mean, how much do we know about Romulans and Cardassians and Klingons and all of those baddies, even the Borg now? We know so much about them, and that's what makes them compelling and interesting villains. Now, I would like to think that if Enterprise had gotten a longer run than it did, we would have started filling in even more about the Suliban than we did in this first part, because I think they had the potential to be some very, very interesting, powerful villains, and maybe we'll still see them come back at some point.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think one of the most powerful scenes of this episode was the one with Travis and Sajin. When Travis says, I've gotten over my assumptions. Why can't you? That was really good.
Well, and one of the things that I liked about that one is that it's almost like they switched roles, not just in their openness to thinking about each other differently, but in their emotionality, because Travis has been very buttoned up, very contained. We usually see him as pretty positive and jovial, even in bad situations. Well, he's pretty pissed at this one, and he's kind of over it. I mean, he's just had physical assault. He's stuck on this prison colony. He's eating valve sealant, and this guy's over here still treating him suspiciously. And he's like, what else do I have to do to show you? I have done everything and more. I could have left, and I stayed to help you. Come on, dude. And that's just so not Travis to lose his cool like that. But so when he does, it really has an impact. And that's one of those moments where I could say that I really could see the acting in Sejen, because he just, even through all that Suliban, you could see that that was the moment. That was when he turned and walked away. That struck him, and that changed that character right there. That was the pivot.
Completely agreed. That is what convinced him. I just wanted to mention a couple of things that sort of made me smile in this heavy episode. I'll just lighten it for a moment. You talk about Trip and T'Pol working together and getting more smooth throughout the episode. When T'Pol distracts Grat with the invitation to dinner, that was great. I mean, are you a vegetarian? That was just a wonderful moment and so well done. She did a great job. I loved that.
Oh, that's like T'Pol turning on the charm hardcore there, which to most people doesn't seem charming, but we know and love T'Pol. And that was seamless and glorious. And I love how everybody was in their places ready to go. And Hoshi, second time, does her job here. Make sure that everything is scrambled, that everything is, exactly the way it needs to be. So nobody sees anything coming. So bravo for her again in the background, just really being competent.
Absolutely. As Hoshi said, the signal could be in the middle of Starfleet Command and they wouldn't hear it. We love Hoshi. And I know I'm jumping way ahead here, but when Malcolm blows up that wall with the charges,
yes,
even in Suliban makeup, he does that quick little glee, that Malcolm look of glee. I'm about to blow something up. That gave me a good little smile there.
Well, a little smile that I got was jumping backwards a bit here when they were talking with the family right after dinner, and they were saying the rhyme about the Suliban. I'm thinking to myself, oh, well, that's really convenient that the universal translator translates this with not only meaning, but the rhyme still intact. Bravo, universal translator. Did not take me out of the episode, but as someone who teaches reading, that would be very difficult. So bravo, universal translator. Hoshi's upgrades, chef's kiss.
Good catch, Abby. That is hilarious. Abby, what are your thoughts on the escape plan and the formulation of the escape plan?
Well, I thought it was really interesting about how, of course, Archer immediately says when he has the opportunity to get out of there, nope. Hold on, we're not ready to leave yet, which is the worst thing you could ever hear a Starfleet officer who you're trying to rescue say, because you hear it all the time. Wait a minute, something's happened down here and I need to fix it. That's a classic Star Trek moment right there. But what I really enjoyed was that you could see how everybody was going all in. Like Enterprise was going all in, the Suliban were going all in, Travis and Archer down there are going all in. Like everybody's really working for this. This isn't, well, we're going to be okay no matter what, and so we're just going to try. No, this was a real plan. And I love that they put Malcolm in the makeup for the Suliban. Like that was brilliant. And I loved one of the things, and this is kind of getting into the actual thing, but I love that Malcolm was so in character as the Suliban. His voice was different when he was not talking as Malcolm. He got the grovelly kind of more undertones of an actual Suliban, which is something I loved in this whole episode, that I wonder if when they cast for the Suliban characters, if they were looking for voice tone as much as they were other things, because they all have that kind of grovelly, almost like they've got rocks rattling around in their chests. And that's so cool that Malcolm did that. And then when he wanted to be Malcolm and let people know who he was, he used his real voice. And that's just one of those tiny little details that is just cool.
I loved that too. And I really liked this whole escape planning scenes. First of all, I want to say the exterior shot of this detention camp was really cool.
Yes.
Like you really got the layout of how big it is, where those ships were parked. Then they draw it on the piece of paper in the camp and it matches. And it just, once again, I really liked the set design, including that exterior shot. It really gave that gloomy, yucky prison feeling.
Yeah, and that was all probably shot on one soundstage where they were just doing it from different angles and all this. But they had a laundry area, they had a food area, they had the water area, they had the cells. I mean, this seemed like it was a really big place when I'm sure it was not. So bravo to the set design and everything in there too. And one other thing I wanted to bring up about this whole rescue part was that the lighting was fantastic through all of it, because they were doing things here, there, all over the place. They were inside of different, like they were in the shuttle for part of it. They were in the office. They were in the hallways. They were in the rooms. The lighting changes, one, really helped you know where you were in all the different things that were happening all at once, but also gave a kind of a gravitas to it, because there were so many brights and shadows that it really was showing that dichotomy in the lighting. And that was something that I noticed after a couple watches and was really impressed with.
When I watch it again, I'm going to pay closer attention to that. I didn't really tune into that, and that sounds really intriguing. Another thing I really liked, we talked about Archer and Grat's relationship and how it continues to deteriorate, and we get a better sense of who Grat is. I mean, he's saying, we're doing this for their protection. Innocent Suliban were killed, and clearly he doesn't really care about them, because at the end his true colors come out when he says they have no rights and all of that. And I love the way Archer says, this isn't about me, it's about their rights, or whatever his exact quote is. He delivered that line with that same tone that he's used in so many episodes when he gets that passionate conviction Archer tone.
Yes.
Which I love so much.
So I also was thinking about, in this whole rescue scene, how interesting it is that nobody notices that Malcolm is not a Suliban who's already there. I mean, they zap him and everything. And the look he gives after getting zapped.
Oh, yeah.
Ooh, that was a look that didn't need any translation, because that was a look. But I thought it was interesting because I had forgotten, it had been a while since I watched this the first time. I had forgotten that the guards never seem to pick up on the fact that they've never seen this guy before. And when they were out in the hallway before Travis started going on about the food to stall for time, I really thought they were going to take a close look and be like, hey, wait a second, who are you? I had forgotten that hadn't happened. And then I wondered to myself, was that a deliberate choice? Because to these guards, all Suliban are the same. And so why would they notice if someone was there that, they hadn't seen before? Because they're not paying enough attention to know. And I don't know if that was a deliberate choice or not, but it made me think.
Abby, I'm glad you brought that up, because I had a similar thought. I was wondering about that as well. And if there's only 89 people in there, you would think that at this point, they would know everybody. They would have a good sense of who their prisoners are. So I wondered about that as well. And that is another thought-provoking gray area presented by this episode.
Yeah, because when Grat's talking at the end with all this, and he's really showing how he feels, he's not even thinking about any of these people as individuals. And the thing that's interesting, and perhaps the most haunting and scary part, is that when you hear him explain it all, it doesn't sound that off kilter. Like, he believes what he believes because of a reason. And it's scary, but you think, without other context, this is how this happens. This is how misinformation, this is how things go south quickly. Overall, it was started to protect them, because they really still did believe, even though they were treating them like prisoners, they really did still believe that they weren't going to even be alive if they left this camp. And how scary that partial information and the strong beliefs and actions it can result in. So it made me think.
Yeah, I was thinking a lot about that too, because Grat does portray that he's looking out for their best interests at the beginning. But clearly by the end, he's making huge assumptions that they're all going to become soldiers, and they this, they that. You're right. There's no respect for individuality at all. And I also think those guards were kind of sadistic. And that really disturbed me.
And it makes me sit here and think, this was 20 years ago that this was out there, that this was a message that was so important to be put out there so explicitly in the big flashing neon sign of this is the message, this is the message, this is what you're supposed to take away from this. And 20 years later, we're still sitting here and going, ugh, because it's still a question that we are grappling with and it's not doing that well on. I mean, we haven't all had our Travis moment yet. And that's hard to sit with, but that's one of the reasons I love Enterprise, because it leaves you with things to think of in that gray area that are not just easily pushed aside. They sit with you.
I agree. And 20 years later, it's a very important message. And you're right. We as a species have not figured it out. And it's sad and unacceptable that 20 years later, people are still being treated the same way. And I could get into depressing thoughts here. So I'm going to lighten it up with a woo-hoo for Trip for a moment. I love during this escape the way Trip comes in there shooting. Not only is he flying so well, I mean, he's not a pilot. He's, taking out the pulse cannons, boom, boom, shooting what he needs to shoot. And then I love the way he sits at the side of that hangar and watches the ships go and kind of escorts them out. Trip Tucker did some great stuff at the end here.
He did. And so Trip, I mean, that's exactly what you would kind of expect him to be doing at the end of all this. Gold star for you for being on brand, Trip.
Another thing I found really interesting, Abby, during this whole escape portion was that they don't let us know what happened to Sajin and Danik at the end. I mean, we assume they're okay, but they do not fill us in. And I found that intriguing and frustrating.
Oh, I completely agree. I think about that. And I think, he's got a daughter waiting back on that ship. I really, 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 really hope he made it there. And I'm hoping that this was something that they had to cut simply because of time, because I can't imagine them writing that open-ended, at least not for both of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was really wondering about that. Like, darn, that upset me.
Here comes somebody's fanfic idea. Write the epilogue.
What are your thoughts on the final scene in the shuttle pod, Abby? Because that was a pretty powerful scene.
It is. Now, besides the fact that I totally commiserate with Malcolm about being itchy, because I'm kind of an itchy person in general, and that is a maddening sensation when you have itches you cannot deal with. I really enjoyed this ending, and I enjoyed the ambiguous nature of it. I enjoyed how Archer is really raw and honest in this. Like, this is, again, I keep saying it, the gray area, but it is, because he, of course, says, yes, I think they're going to get out of the Tandaranian space. It's going to be fine. But then he asks, do I think they'll be all right? And he gives that non-committal, like, just kind of, not even a word, not even a shrug, just a silence again. But he did not ask, do I think, will they be safe? Like, he asked, do I think they'll be all right? Now, safe means like they don't blow up their ships, they find a place to live, blah, 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 blah. All right means that they have to deal with not only what's coming in the future, but what they have just gone through in the past. I mean, they're going to be haunted by this experience in this internment camp for a long time, and that's going to impact everything. And I think just the fact that Archer phrased it, do I think they'll be all right, was so much more powerful than will they be safe. And that has stuck with me rewatching this. That has been what I've been thinking about. And perhaps it's the state of the world, but that's what I'm going to be thinking about this episode for a long time to come.
Yeah, I hear you. I took a note on the ambiguity here also. I like that they ended the episode like this. I like that they left it open-ended and that Archer had that moment where he said that and that look on his face. Because there is so much unknown here. I thought that was really poignant and haunting and very well done. Well, we can hear that dog barking, so it must be time for Porthos's pick, our favorite part. Abby, what's your favorite part of Detained?
So there were lots of things that I liked that were all involved with like the production stuff. But one of the tiny little details that just made me smile every single time I saw it was that by the second day they were in the internment camp, Travis has beard scruff. He's got stubble, but he's obviously not shaving while he's hanging with the Suliban. And I don't know why they didn't have Archer do that. I mean, I've never seen Scott Bakula with a beard. Maybe it was his thing. He didn't want to, or he wouldn't have grown it in 2 days or whatever. But I love that they had Anthony Montgomery do it because it just added that tiny little bit of realism that you don't even realize that you need until you see it. And then you're like, that's beautiful.
Abby, I am so glad you picked that. It definitely stood out to me and it made it so realistic.
Mm-hmm.
You're right. Awesome pick.
What about you, Melanie? What's your favorite part this time?
Okay, my favorite part. I'm a big fan of David Livingston as a director. He's directed some of my favorite Enterprise episodes. He's so unbelievably talented. And I loved some of the camera shots in this one, like when they first showed the detention area with the water pipes and all of that. And they show the guards walking in. David uses some of those overhead, does a lot of overhead camera shots and all kinds of funky angles. And I think my favorite part is when they're formulating the escape plan and he's shooting Malcolm, Travis, and Danik from below, looking up in their heads as if they were like in a huddle. And I thought that was super cool and interesting. So I think that was probably one of my favorite parts.
I have to say, I had a note that said up the nostrils shot for the exact same reason. But I also noticed that when we saw our one little glimpse of Phlox, it was up his nose too. So, hey. But I love him as a director. I think that the angles are interesting. The shots are interesting. It's things you don't expect. One of the ones that stood out to me is when they were first talking about the map of the complex and everything. There's what looks almost like a curtain, a very loosely woven curtain in front of the character. So you can see through it, but it's there. Like it's almost showing that this is something secretive, but you can still see through it because we're the audience. So there's a lot of little things in there that are just really neat. And we talked about all the pieces that went into this and all the choices of angles and sets. And yes, one of the best directors. And I'm so glad that Star Trek realized that and utilized him as often as they did.
Accessing library computer data.
All right, it's time for our trivia sharing. Abby, what can you tell us about this episode?
So kind of a fun sci-fi one this time, not just in Star Trek, but this is the only Star Trek appearance of Dean Stockwell, the co-star of Scott Bakula for 5 years on Quantum Leap. And he was Colonel Grat. And one of the best parts in this for me was he comments to Archer, "I'm sorry we couldn't have met under better circumstances." And Archer goes back, "So am I," which is so funny because they have met in other circumstances. So that tiny little meta moment there was wonderful for me and a great piece of trivia.
Yeah, I love that moment. That is very meta. And I was thinking about how fun it must have been for them to work together again.
Yeah.
And it got me thinking about what that was like for them. That was super cool.
All right. What interesting tidbit have you dug up for us this week about this episode, Melanie?
Okay, I have a quick little small one, and then I'll get to my main one. The small one is that Christopher Shea, who played Sajin in this episode, played Kevin the Vorta in Rocks and Shoals, Deep Space Nine, which is one of my favorite Deep Space Nine episodes. He was great in that also, and I thought that was really interesting. Okay, so I have been watching the Shuttle Pod Show, the new podcast by Dominic Keating and Connor Trenier that they're doing on YouTube, which has been so fantastic, and I'm sure our fellow Enterprise fans out there are enjoying it as well. If you haven't checked it out, check it out. It's totally great. Well, this most recent episode at the time of this recording featured John Billingsley, played Dr. Phlox, and they were, sharing tidbits of their time filming the show together. And we've talked about this before on First Flight, how John Billingsley was a great prankster.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, he divulged that he used to love to give the other cast members little jabs about, even if he only has 1 or 2 lines or one scene, he still gets a paycheck where they have to be there 16 hours a day. So he used to joke around with them and sing songs about it. And I just thought that was so funny. So then when I watched Detained right after seeing that, I noticed that in this episode, he has like literally one line.
Yep.
He's transforming Malcolm into a Suliban. He says, almost ready now. And I have to say that popped immediately into my mind of John Billingsley had 1 or 2 lines, got his paycheck. It made me laugh because I had just seen it. So that's my trivia.
Yes, I would like to second that. If you are not listening to and or watching Shuttle Pod, you are missing out. You will love listening to all of them talk about Enterprise.
Yep, it's fantastic.
Transfer of data is complete.
Well, we've arrived at our Vulcans Verdict. On a scale of 1 to 10 grapplers, how are you rating this one, Abby?
Well, this one really has made me think. Like, it has not been far from my mind since I started rewatching for this. And I was thinking about how this story was so important. There was no B plot. This was just the story.
Mm-hmm.
And this message connects to the bigger world, to bigger stories, to cultures, both fictional and nonfiction. And I think that this is a message that we still really need to hear. We have not made the amount of progress in 2 decades that we should have in living the values that we know Star Trek encourages us to live. So this is one that more people should watch and ponder like we have and think about, because maybe it will help. So this one gets a good solid 8 out of 10 grapplers for me. How about you, Melanie?
Yeah, I'm totally with you, Abby. I second everything that you just said. It is such an important message. And even though, I will say Mike Sussman, who co-wrote this episode, he has gone on to say that he really isn't a fan of allegory episodes. And I understand where he's coming from. But for me personally, I really enjoy this episode. It's a very valid message today, as you were saying. Can't be understated. This one has always stuck out for me in season 1 as one of the ones that I really, really enjoy. So it was so nice to revisit again. The acting was powerful. The whole production design, the relationships, everything about it, I thought was really, really strong and poignant. So I also, Abby, gave it an 8 out of 10 grapplers.
I love it when we match.
My chronometer's running backwards, sir.
Incoming transmission.
You read my letter?
Well, it's funny because Colonel Grat was asking Archer about Silic and all of that, which leads us right into Daniels sending us back in the timeline so we can hear some of your thoughts and picks. Abby, what do you have for us tonight?
All right. I have 2 quick ones about our episode on Oasis, which you might remember guest starred Renee Aubergenois. So that's one of the first comments we have here from a regular listener, Phil Bowers at Phil J. Bowers. That's Bowers. And he says, I love this episode. Archer and Trip come across really well and, quote, not Odo, unquote, is a great character. And we talked a lot about that in that one. And yes, we love seeing Renee playing not Odo. And I love that he quoted it and called him not Odo. And my second one tonight is from our friend Michael at Michael Angie. And he says that he thought this episode was a lot like Shadow Play meets Forbidden Planet meets The Tempest. And I had not thought about it like that until I read his comment. And now I'm like, that's brilliant, because that's exactly what it is. So gold star for you, Michael, for making me think. I will never watch this one again without thinking about that combination.
Yeah, I really appreciated their feedback also. Phil was thinking along the same lines as us, where Trip and Archer's qualities were highlighted so strongly in that Oasis episode. So that was really cool. And Michael, as always, thank you for that insightful analogy. We really appreciate everyone sending us feedback on Enterprise. So thanks for sharing with us.
Yeah, and come check it out because let me tell you, most of the time the threads end up with some sort of Porthos in them somewhere, and that always makes the day better.
Porthos really does make the day better. And if you'd like to continue the discussion with us or share any of your picks or thoughts or ratings, you can reach us at First Flight Pod on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And you can subscribe to our show on Apple, Spotify, Google, and YouTube platforms. And you can reach me on Twitter at ShuttlePod2. That's ShuttlePodTWO. Abby, what's the best way to reach you?
Best way to find me is on Twitter, and I'm at Abby M. Sommer, and that's SOMMER.
We really want to thank you again for spending this time with us, and we'll be back next time with Vox Sola, the 21st episode of Season 1. And as always, we leave you with this quote from Captain Jonathan Archer. The most profound discoveries are not necessarily beyond that next star. They're within us, woven into the threads that bind us, all of us, to each other.